Welcome to the Neighborhood News. It's Tuesday, 7 o'clock at night. We're back for one more show of the Neighborhood News. If you are watching this show and it's not a Tuesday night, it's because you're watching a repeat show. Please come back next Tuesday. We will have a brand new show for you. For a Portuguese community, sejam bem-vindos para mais um programa de notícias da sua vizinhança. Hoje é terça-feira, 7 horas da noite, aqui no canal 95. Nós estamos de volta para mais um programa de notícias da sua vizinhança. Se está a escutar este programa e não é terça-feira à noite, é porque está a escutar um programa que está a ser repetido. Por favor, venha na próxima terça-feira e nós temos um programa novo para si. Também não se esqueça que nós, na quarta-feira, às 8 da noite, temos o nosso programa em língua portuguesa, Amigos. Este programa é transmitido todas as quartas-feiras. Fique connosco, hoje temos convidados aqui no estúdio. Before I introduce our guests for this show, I would like to remind that we have our Portuguese show here on Channel 95 on Wednesdays, 8 o'clock at night. And works the same way if you watch the Amigos and it's not a Wednesday night. It's because you're watching a repeat show. So please come back the following Wednesday and we will have a brand new show for you. Today we're going to talk something very common on a Portuguese community, and we're going to talk about diabetes. And nobody better than Dr. Witt to talk to us about diabetes and what can we do to at least. My dad used to say, I'm never going to be cured, but I can maintain it and I can live longer. And he's 72 years old and he's still strong. Dr. Witt, thank you.
Good for him.
For being in here.
Yep. Well, as you mentioned, diabetes is something that many people have to live with, but if people do the right things, they can certainly reduce the symptoms. And I'll tell you a little later that some people are actually getting rid of their diabetes. And
Oh,
I'll
really?
tell you how that is, right?
I remember my dad, probably on my 10s, maybe 15, between 10 and 15. I remember my dad used to have black coffee and no salt. My mother used to make food for us in one way and my dad's food separate.
Right.
Because he cut the salt, he cut so much that when he went back to the doctor said, you're going to die from the cure, not from the diabetes, you know, because he cut everything. He said, it's not good, I'm going to cut
it. Right. Right.
And then he's been maintaining, you know, and he got so used to not to have sugar, not to have salt,
Yep.
not to eat this or to eat that. But he still enjoys when he come over here, he gets himself prepared because he knows over here he's going to go out for ice creams and all of that. So he said, you know, he start getting ready 6 months before he comes over here.
Yep.
So he said, now I go over there, I can eat everything for a week, and then I go right back to another year of... But he always has his medication with him, and he always has his blood tests
Sure.
done,
Yep,
you know,
that's
every
important.
morning and
Right.
everything. So if he feels a little dizzy, here he goes. I already know what he's looking for,
Yep.
you know, and he does his own. Nobody even noticed what he's doing.
We wish everybody were as good about taking care of himself as
Yeah,
your
like
father
my
did.
dad. So.
Yeah. Well, let me just say to start with, diabetes is a very common disease, becoming more and more prevalent, particularly in a community like Fall River, but across the nation. The latest studies have shown that 14% of Americans overall have diabetes. That's up from about 6 or 7% 10, 20 years ago. And pre-diabetes, which is important for people to understand, diabetes isn't something you suddenly get, but it's a continuum of increased blood sugar over a period of time. And we call pre-diabetes people who have a little bit of elevated blood sugar, and if it keeps getting higher and higher, they'll eventually get to the place where it's now called diabetes, and that can get higher and higher and higher. So prediabetes is kind of a way of warning people that you're on the way to developing diabetes. And if you make some changes, you may be able to prevent that from happening altogether. If you don't, and you don't do like your father,
Yeah.
you can end up with a very serious illness, something that won't kill you in the next couple of months, but it's a disease that, if left untreated over a period of time, can lead to kidney disease, eye disease, and the worst is amputation of your limbs, fingers,
Yes.
toes, things of that
Yes.
sort. So it's not a fun illness. And we also know that half of the people who have heart attacks are people with diabetes, because it affects basically the endothelium, the lining of our blood vessels. And having high blood sugar over a period of time eventually takes its toll on our cardiovascular system. That's why your eyes are affected, because of the little blood vessels in the back of your eyes. That's why your kidneys are affected, because of the tiny blood vessels there. And then your nerves, something called neuropathy. If the blood vessels fail around your nerves, then the nerves die. And then you can't feel anything, and then you injure your feet in particular, and that's what leads to major problems. So it's not a good disease, okay? I didn't know about it myself until I developed it. And that occurred about 12 years ago. And I didn't know I was on the way toward with prediabetes and diabetes until I had a blood test. And I very much urge anybody over the age of 50, and actually even earlier, to be sure at least once a year to have a test called the A1C. That's a measure of the effect of elevated blood sugar on your blood cells, your red blood cells, over a 3-month period of time. It's the measure that most doctors are using now. They used to give you what's called a fasting glucose test, and there's some problems with that, because you may have an elevated result one time and not another, and you're not really sure. But the A1C test is a very good test because it looks back over 3 months, and it's much harder to be misled by that. And if you get an elevated A1C between 5.7 and 6.3, you're going to be given a note by your doctor saying you're pre-diabetic. And there are some things you need to do about that. If you should find, as many people do, a lot of people don't know that they have diabetes until they might go to the emergency room, you know, for a sprained ankle or something of that sort. And in the course of that, they'll find out that their blood sugar is elevated, and they suddenly are told that they have diabetes and may have had diabetes for several years without knowing it.
For people that have blood pressure problems, can you identify that with diabetes somehow?
Well, there are 3 things that often go together, and they're called metabolic syndrome. It's a fancy medical term, but it means that you've got some changes that are taking place in your body that are all kind of connected. And metabolic syndrome will include high blood pressure, high blood sugar, which we just talked about, and also high cholesterol, something called lipidemia and hypolipidemia. Those are 3 things that frequently occur together. And they occur primarily, but not exclusively, in people who are overweight and who may have inherited a tendency toward that, and who are not paying attention to both their diet and exercise in their life. These are 3 symptoms that typically increase with age. So you may be completely free of those symptoms in your 20s and 30s and even your 40s, and then find in your 50s or 60s that you're developing one or more of those altogether. Which ones you get will depend on your particular genetic history and your behavior, things you eat and how active you are.
smoking is, you think, increases?
Yes, it increases your
chances?
risk, right?
Okay.
Yeah, doesn't mean necessarily that smoking itself causes it, but we know that people who smoke tend to have a higher percentage of diabetes, hypertension, and cholesterol as well.
Alcohol.
There is some indication with that. Alcohol is an interesting substance in that in
They drink
small
to forget.
amounts,
Usually they drink to forget, that's
in
right.
small amounts, it can actually be beneficial for you. But in larger amounts, more for men, more than 2 4-ounce drinks a day, and for women, 1, over a period of time, certainly can lead to alcohol dependence and alcoholism. And that increases your risks of a number of things, including heart disease. So,
And both of them dangerous. Alcohol and smoking.
alcohol in large amounts, okay, and smoking in any amount increase your risk of these diseases. Correct.
My next question is, some communities are more familiar with diabetes than others.
Yes.
And Portuguese community are very familiar with the
Unfortunately, right. We've,
You believe it's the Charisse too?
I don't know that it has anything to do with Charisse. Charisse gets blamed for a lot of things. I could actually make a case that eating Charisse may be beneficial, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the point is that if you have a certain inheritance, for instance, in my family, I'm not Portuguese, but my Scotch-Irish ancestors have developed diabetes. My grandmother had it, my mother had it, and now my sister has it. Okay, she's older than I am, but she developed symptoms a little before I did. So those are good indications. If you have somebody in the family, that's one of the things that means that you really need to be paying attention to this. Okay, doesn't mean necessarily that you'll develop diabetes, but your risk increases. So if you're Portuguese, there are 2 things that you really need to pay attention to. Okay. One is your ancestry that you can't change, okay?
Exactly.
But the other is your diet. And anyone who treats anyone for diabetes should be paying close attention to what people are eating. There's somewhat of a controversy among people who treat diabetes. I should be clear, I'm not a medical doctor.
Yeah,
I'm a clinical psychologist, okay? I've learned a lot of this as I've developed my own illness and learned how to treat it. But there are also many behavioral aspects that are important, and that's where psychology comes in terms of helping people make the kinds of changes they need to make. But in the instance of diet, let's first begin by understanding that essentially diabetes is an illness of carbohydrate oversensitivity. Now, carbohydrates are the foods that contain starches and sugars. So everything from the typical cakes and candy and ice cream and things of that sort that we know that has sugar, and like the sugar you put in your coffee, that's pretty clear that's sugar. But people also need to know that starches like potatoes and bread and rice and even some starchy vegetables, ones that grow under the ground like root vegetables and things of that sort, contain starch, which is what's known as a complex carbohydrate. That means it's a big molecule. As soon as you put that in your mouth, your saliva actually starts breaking those big carbohydrate molecules into what we call simple sugars, which by the time it gets through your stomach and into your digestive system becomes glucose. Glucose is a sugar that circulates in your bloodstream. And there are only 2 things that can happen to glucose. One is you can burn it for energy, muscle energy, or body heat, okay? Or you store it as fat. That's it. You don't excrete it. Once you put it in your mouth, you have to live with it. Okay, your body has to use it. Now, if you and I were working construction or on a farm, doing heavy manual labor all day long, we would burn a lot of that glucose and it wouldn't become a problem. But I don't know about you. I don't do that much heavy manual labor, maybe on a Saturday or something of that sort, but certainly not enough to take care of all the glucose that I would normally eat. So what happens to the unburned, unused glucose or sugar, it becomes fat. And it gets stored in our bodies. And you and I know that with men, it happens to go right here, okay? Women tend to put it in other places, but in the end, it's the stored fat that then creates another set of problems because it creates what's called insulin resistance. When we eat anything with starch or sugar, it stimulates our pancreas to make a hormone called insulin. Insulin has a lot of functions in our body, but one of the primary functions is to take the sugar from that's circulating in our bloodstream and put it into our cells. Okay, that's important because that's how we get energy or how we store that energy as fat. So insulin is something we can't live without. And people who don't have insulin, people with type 1 diabetes, have a pancreas that stopped creating insulin. And that's a different kind of problem. Those people have to take insulin artificially, have to inject it or take it by mouth, so that their body can use the sugar that's in it. Otherwise, they would get very sick and you can die from that. But that's not the problem that I have or that many people with type 2 diabetes have. That's insulin resistance. That means after having too much sugar and too much starch over a period of time, my body stops using the insulin to store the blood sugar. And that's why my blood sugar will go up if I eat too many things with sugar or starch in it. That's when I get a blood test, that's why I have elevated blood sugar, because the insulin in my pancreas is not doing a good job of getting that sugar stored in my body. And having too much sugar in your bloodstream is the very problem that causes some of the diseases we're talking about. So that's important that we understand what's happening. Now that tells us something, okay? If the problem is my body can't handle sugar and starch the way it used to 20 years ago, and now I've got elevated blood sugar, guess what the best thing for me to do is? If I'm eating something that's not good for me, what do I need to do?
Don't eat it.
Don't eat it. It's pretty simple.
Don't eat it. Because a lot of people say, I'm going to eat and then I'm going to exercise. But that there's a work all the time.
4, 5, 6 hours of exercise, maybe.
Yes.
But half an hour, no.
And for those that say that my work, I walk a lot at work, I go up and down stairs, steps, and all of that. Is that effective exercise, like you taking a walk?
Sure. Any kind of muscular movement helps, okay? And walking, and you don't have to go to a gym and lift weights or something of that sort. But walking is one of the best exercises. Let me give you an example of that. The diabetes management program at South Coast has a walking group every Thursday night at 5 o'clock that meets at Britland Park, and they walk the new Quequechan River Rail Trail and back. It's about a mile back and forth. Takes about 30, 40 minutes, okay? They're not out there running, but they're walking. And they're doing that because they know that people with diabetes do much better if they're getting some regular physical exercise. And walking is an excellent exercise. I run and I bicycle, and those are the ways that I get my regular exercise. But just about anything, climbing stairs, as you mentioned, anything that gets your large muscles moving for some period of time. And the recommendation is to do that at least an hour every other day, preferably an hour every day. So those are things that can help anybody with diabetes and can help people who are pre-diabetic. Now, I didn't tell you the percentage of people in this country who have pre-diabetes. You might not realize that 38% of people in America are pre-diabetic. Add that together with the 14% of people who already have diabetes, you now are over 50%. Over half of the population in America has either diabetes or pre-diabetes, okay? That's a huge number. And my guess, because we don't know, we haven't gone out and measured everybody in Fall River, but because of the Portuguese ancestry and the Portuguese diet, and because of a number of other factors, people are not terribly physically active in the community, and people are not eating the best diet in Fall River. And those things probably contribute to an even higher percentage of diabetes and prediabetes. My guess is we're probably somewhere around 65% of people who are diabetic or pre-diabetic. That's a lot of people in this community.
Yes.
And
Yeah. And if we talk about education and educating people, and I know you have a program that talks specifically about that. Well, how you been out there giving the message?
Well, we started about 5 years ago doing groups to teach people how to eat a diet with fewer carbohydrates, with less sugar and less starch in their diet, and how to replace that with other foods that will keep them from going hungry, and at the same time bring their diabetes symptoms down. When I started out, my A1C was 6.3, which is just shy of diabetes. Now, several years later, my A1C is 5.3. I'm below the normal limit, so I am now no longer diabetic, and that's what I'm telling you, that you can resolve. It's not really curing, because if I went back to eat the way I used to, I'd be diabetic again. But I've learned what I can eat, and that combined with exercise has resolved my diabetes, so I'm no longer diabetic. And I teach people in a class, it's what's called a low carbohydrate diet. People can learn about that. I have a website on, maybe you can put that up at GFRpartners, PARTNERS.com / and then low carbs with capital L, capital C, and that's CARBS.HTML.
We will put it on.
If you have that available, anybody can go there, and I have over a dozen videos of the programs that I've put on, and I work with Amanda Raposo from South Coast Hospital. She's a registered dietitian. She treats people just this way in their clinic, and I have other people on that show. Plus there are probably 15 other videos professionally done with other people explaining this whole thing. And what both Amanda and I find is that once people learn how to eat a low-carb diet, they do just fine. And that some people have either reduced or in some cases actually gone off their diabetes medication. So many people have been told, well, just keep eating the way you used to and use medication and you'll be fine. But that doesn't work, because the condition continues and people actually get worse over time. That doesn't need to happen.
Because comes to a point that the medication, it's not enough. Now they have to increase it.
Exactly.
Increase it.
Right.
And when you take a medication way too much, then you have other problems. Now the kidneys start, having problems because they work as filters, and it's one thing.
Medication alone, though, can help a lot of people. I'm not saying people Certainly, no one should go off their medication without talking to their physician, okay? But there are ways you can learn to make changes in your diet. You're going to have Rose Couto on your next show, and one in Portuguese, and we're going to be on the radio together. And Rose is an excellent nurse, and she works with people with diabetes, and she will work with people who tell her that they'd like to learn how to reduce their carbohydrates in their diet. Not everybody will. A lot of people say, oh, I can't live without bread, and I have to have potatoes, rice, and bread at every meal, right? Isn't that a Portuguese meal?
That's a Portuguese.
Right. And she'll say to them, that's not good, you need to cut down. But there are some people who say, no, I'm going to cut those out altogether. And how can I do that? And you know, the interesting thing when you do that, because if you do that, you're going to get fewer calories and you're going to be hungry. But we also teach people how to increase fats in their diet. And I could do a whole show on fats, but we've been, so many of us have been told for so long that fat's not good for you.
But I have to tell you this, and I eat a lot of bread, but when you have just bread for a meal, an hour after, you're hungry again.
There you go.
Because I can eat 3-4 popsicks, those small Portuguese rolls, for breakfast with butter and cheese. I love those. I can eat 4 of those, but guaranteed an hour after, I'm hungry again.
Right.
And I was full just an hour ago.
That's right. and I can explain why, because the carbohydrates that you're eating get converted to sugar and go into your bloodstream, and they'll raise your insulin levels and your blood sugar, but that quickly digests. It takes only 2 hours or less to go through you. You talked about butter and cheese. Those are the things you need to be eating. Because both butter and cheese will not raise your blood sugar in any significant amount, and will produce something we call in medical terms satiety. Okay, you're satiated. It means you're full. You feel full and you don't get hungry. It takes our body about 8 hours to digest the fat in cheese, for instance. So one of the things I've learned to do, because I eat very few carbohydrates, less than 20 grams a day, which is a pretty low carbohydrate diet. But I know if I'm hungry, say in the middle of the afternoon, if I eat 2 ounces of cheese, within about 20 minutes I'm fine. And often I'm fine for 4 or 5 hours.
So I need to change those Portuguese rolls to toasts with my butter and cheese.
I would put those aside and just eat the butter and cheese. Right?
Dr. Witt, thank you for coming. Very interesting show, and I hope that you can come back one day.
I'd be happy to.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I see you guys next week. Thank you.